Hello and welcome to another standard video. Today we're going to try to meld Titania with Argoth Sanctum of Nature to form Titania Gaea Incarnate, as suggested by my supporters on Patreon. So the goal is simple: play Titania, fill the graveyard with enough lands, and then eventually find Argoth to meld the two, and then we get to return all land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. Titania also has power toughness equal to the number of lands we control, so that's going to be huge, and also has a lot of keywords including trample and haste, so it gets to attack right away, and with the additional mana we can now also start putting +1 counters on our lands, so that's usually good enough to win the game. Then we've got some more landfall synergies throughout, such as the Vine Lasher with Offspring potentially, triggering whenever a land enters to deal 1 damage to target opponent. It's also very good if we manage to meld Titania with a Vine Lasher in play, since that's going to be a lot of extra damage. Then at 3 mana there's also Nissa Resurgent Animist, which is quite synergistic with Titania, because if we enable landfall twice in 1 turn, we get to find an elf or elemental at random, so that could also be Titania, which is an elemental, and then there's a few more elves throughout. Of course, a great addition now is also Llanowar Elves to potentially cast some of our 3-drops on turn 2 already, and another elf we can find with Nissa, but just a landfall ability to generate additional mana is also quite useful in helping us double spell. And then we also have the Blossoming Tortoise as our curve topper here, which can mill 3 cards when it enters and attacks, and then we get to return a land from our graveyard to the battlefield. So that's how we can potentially get an Argoth back out of the graveyard to set up our melded Titania, in case we don't draw one naturally. And then activated abilities of lands we control get a 1 mana discount, which is useful for activating Argoth or perhaps a Restless Cottage, which will cost only 3 to activate as opposed to 4. And land creatures also get +1/+1, so that applies to the cottage, turning it into a 5/5, and then any lands we animate with Titania will also get +1/+1. Then I'm also playing a 1-off Spelunking, so our lands can enter untapped from now on, also quite synergistic with a melded Titania, so we can immediately tap all those lands for mana, and also quite good with a Blossoming Tortoise when it gets a land back out of the graveyard. And then taking a look at our other cards here, we've got a little bit of interaction with Cut Down at 1 mana, and then at 2 mana Anoint with Affliction, as well as a Virtue of Persistence. Playing Anoint over Go for the Throat because it can be a better answer against various red decks that have cards like Heartfire Hero, which can deal damage on the way out otherwise, and against certain cards like maybe the Oculus and the Blue-Eyed Oculus deck, it's good to exile it for good. Cards like Mosswood Dread Knight are also good to exile, so I found Anoint to be more useful than Go for the Throat recently, at least in best of 1, but that's of course a card you could swap out at any time, and it can still be an answer to the 6/6 demon token out of the various demon decks, so it can still hit some larger creatures as well. And then a Virtue of Persistence in the meantime gives us some removal that's still quite good against the red aggro decks, and it also gives us a late game enchantment that can recur creatures out of the graveyard in case our opponent's got a lot of removal. This can still help us get back cards like Titania to set up the meld, as well as perhaps an Overlord of the Baelmerk, which in turn can mill more cards and also get creatures back out of the graveyard. So this gives us another way to enable Titania by milling more lands, and can also get Titania back. And then Say Its Name can do the same, getting back both lands and creatures out of the graveyard after milling 3. And if we get lucky enough to have multiple copies of Say Its Name in the graveyard, we can also summon Altanak, the Thrice Called, a 9/9 Trampler. But the 2 mana ability on Altanak is still decent, as it's also a way of ramping if we have a land in the graveyard. And then of course Fabled Passage is one of the most important cards in this deck, as a fetch land that helps us enable landfall twice in 1 turn, and that's especially good with Nissa, but also a land we can keep getting back with a Tortoise without reducing the number of lands in our graveyard, which can sometimes be a problem with Titania if you try and meld it, which is also why I'm not playing with Aftermath Analyst, which would slot in the deck nicely as another elf we can find with Nissa and a way to get lands back out of the graveyard. But if we get all our lands back at once, then we're going to struggle to meld Titania, since we do need 4 lands in graveyard to make that happen, and then the payoff of melding Titania is also less impactful if we've already returned most of our lands out of the graveyard, but that's something else to consider. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. We've got a few options on turn 1 here with our tap land and our 1-drops. Might start with a Cottage, and then turn 2 I can still play Vine Lasher into Blooming Marsh to keep up Cut Down. And that way we'll get at least 1 damage out of our creature. But we might wait to cast it with Offspring. Opponent black-white, Doll, so it looks like a Reanimator deck. And a Fester Leech discarded, okay. So, do we still want to wait on Vine Lasher? I think I do. Just play this tapped, keep up cut down. Possible our opponent's playing a deck that's trying to reanimate a bunch of 1 and 2 drops. In which case, destroying the Doll isn't a great play. So I'll wait and see what else they do. Our opponent does nothing. In that case, sure. I'll remove the Doll. And then Vine Lasher with Offspring. Even if they were holding removal, hopefully we get to keep one of them. And then Tortoise helps us ramp towards Virtue Persistence as well. And Nowhere to Run answers the 1-2. Alright, so play a land. Could try to attack first. Opponent's just going to make a token to trade, that's fine. So they're not destroying the Tortoise this turn. Small chance I could have gotten a little bit more damage out of the token by playing Tortoise first. But now we kind of forced them to make that play. Just 1 land to get back. So next turn we could also look at our lands that can activate at a discount thanks to Tortoise, but Tortoise gets removed. So good that we still have Virtue Persistence to work towards. And then Animating Cottage into 2 open mana, maybe not the best idea. So we're just going to go milling with Argoth. And I'll play another one. Fabled Passage we can maybe save to combine with Nissa or other landfall cards. So I'll attack first. Now black-white could still have answers to our enchantments, so this isn't guaranteed to stick around. For now, opponent makes a treasure. Opponent's looking at our graveyard to see what we would reanimate. And right now Tortoise probably makes the most sense, or Nissa, since we can use Fabled Passage alongside it. But if they have removal, Tortoise at least gets immediate value. Meld Titania, that's good. And we drew 1 as well. Alright, so I can play Titania, activate Argoth. And then we should be able to transform Titania next turn if there's no sweeper. Could hang on to Fabled Passage still. But that could have been an extra landing graveyard in case we didn't mill more lands. Does our opponent have a Sunfall, perhaps? Would be pretty effective here. It's going to be a Volgavoth instead. Alright, so opponent was a Reanimator deck, but cast it the old-fashioned way. Now we get to reanimate probably Nissa, since we're about to make a lot of mana here. Transform Titania. And then with the floating mana we can still activate Titania's ability before we move to the next phase. Found a backup Titania. Alright, so we'll activate targeting a land. And I could activate once again with the floating mana. Put more counters on the same land so that can attack. Alright, and then we go to our draw step. Find a Spelunking, also would have been awesome. Still probably worth playing. With Nissa out. Vine Lasher's not bad either. So we certainly have options. So I could play Vine Lasher with Offspring and then Fabled Passage. And that also makes more mana with Nissa. But not enough to put more counters on the Llanowar Wastes, but at this point I can just attack. Opponent will be forced to jump, so that should be good enough. So does Tortoise get to attack? If they block Tortoise with Volgavoth, they gain 9, up to 23, but we still have more than 23 damage, so everyone can attack. I guess Volgavoth does get to steal those cards that we milled with Tortoise, but that's alright. Block the 9/9, and then we can still fetch, triggering Vine Lasher. And go to damage. Alright, sweet. So just enough damage to cross the finish line. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. Our hand's got potential. Turn 1, could play Vine Lasher already. Could wait on Offspring, and for now just play a tapped Cottage. Want to try and combine Nissa with Fabled Passage if possible. So turn 2 Overlord seems reasonable. And found another Vine Lasher. So against the red-green prowess, finding life gain and removal is going to be important. Turn to Manifold Mouse, at least they didn't have Heartfire Hero on the battlefield. But next turn that's going to hurt. And Ruin Anoint. Alright, so now I imagine we keep up Anoint. Opponent is playing green, so they could also have protection spells, potentially a reason to play it differently and just main phase exile the Manifold Mouse. Or we could keep Anoint for Screaming Nemesis if they're playing it, so we'll see what happens. But we'll definitely have to keep protection spells in mind. For now, Swiss Spear. Manifold gives itself double strike. So if I block an opposing Swiss Spear, we kind of incentivize them to cast a spell to trigger Prowess, at which point we know that the coast is clear to Anoint. So we don't run into any tricks protecting the Manifold Mouse, if that's what we try and target. Monstrous Rage, yeah, this is perfect. We still lose the Vine Lasher here, but that's worth it, as opposed to taking 1,000,000 damage. And now I prioritize triggering Nissa. Could also go for Tortoise now, actually. But Nissa into Fabled Passage means we can still play Vine Lasher with Offspring, or maybe some other 3-drop we found along the way. So we have more chum blockers at the ready. Found Titania. Yeah, Titania sounds good to me. Since next turn we can enable it with Tortoise. Don't have Argoth yet, so that's what we're looking for to get back out of the graveyard. So now I'm less incentivized to block, but Obliterating Bolt not only destroys Titania but exiles it as well, so that was a setback. Opponent didn't even bluff an attack since they were out of ways to enable Prowess, so at least we have that going for us. And then now, do I play Vine Lasher as a 1-drop and then Tortoise? Tortoise can get back Fabled Passage, but it will be tapped, so I can't immediately sacrifice it. Yeah, I think this is reasonable since we'll again trigger Nissa to find another Alpha Elemental. So we'll have more things to cast afterwards. But definitely going for Fabled Passage. And found a backup Nissa. Alright, so we'll pass a turn. Overlord next turn turns into a creature. Also have a cottage that can now activate for just 3 mana thanks to Tortoise. And that's another way to maybe gain some life back with a food token. Double striking Heartfire Hero we can still trade for Nissa. So they're not gonna attack. Alrighty. So what's step 1? Fetch with Fabled Passage. Make a mana. And then we might be looking to animate Restless Cottage as well. Nissa finds Titania, so we can play that in addition to animating the cottage. Now attacking with Tortoise also triggers Titania to gain life if we mill a land. And doesn't matter what we exile. Probably fine to just target their stuff. And we found Argoth, perfect. So next turn Titania can transform. And then I'll sack the food token so I can still play Llanowar Elves. So we're back to 21, and next turn Titania transforms. We also have Overlord on defense. So yeah, things are going according to plan. Not like our opponent had a bad draw, but our removal spell on the Manifold Mouse definitely saved us a lot of damage. Now Innkeeper's Talent, another way to trigger their Valiant creatures. If they go for a double strike, we can also consider chum blocking with the Llanowar Elves, but I guess it also has Trample. Thanks to the extra Manifold Mouse, and sadly our opponent concedes before we get to Meld Titania, but we can have a look here to see what would have happened, just for my personal curiosity. So we currently have 5 lands in graveyard, it seems, so that's 5 more Vinelasher triggers to begin with, a bunch of mana from Nissa. We can use the floating mana to activate, I guess Argoth is going to go away, but we could use that to animate the cottage, so we don't have to spend mana on it in our main phase. And then of course we also have a huge trampling Titania from the transformation, and then we can also use additional mana to put counters on our lands and ship those as well. Also getting pumped by the Tortoise once again, giving our land creatures +1/+1, so we likely get to attack for lethal. Overlord gets to mill more, which in turn can also get back more creatures, which can find more lands, make more mana, deal more damage. So yeah, definitely a thing of beauty. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw. We have lots of removal. So we're okay against aggro, and then Overlord likely finds another creature out of the graveyard. Got some good late game with Cottage and Argoth. So the removal spells complement the lands as well, in a way. More removal with Virtue. So I don't mind if they play a Deep Cavern Bat here. Opponent's blue-black instead. Alright, I'm fine playing the waiting game. Prologue, I see, it's a poison deck. So now all of a sudden our removal doesn't look quite as good anymore. Although we can still remove their 1/1. And then Titania's likely getting removed, but then we can maybe get it back with Overlord. Hoping it doesn't get exiled by an opposing annoyance. Alright, drown. And Tortoise. Alright, so we're going for Overlord, which, if it mills a land, sets up Altanak as well. So we have some decent tools, but our opponent's deck is going to be filled to the brim with removal and counter spells. So it's going to be difficult to get something to stick. If I go for Altanak, I'm also removing a land from my graveyard, but it does help us ramp. Or we just jam Titania, and then next turn maybe Tortoise. Yeah, again, if it doesn't get exiled, at least I can still get it back with Virtue. but the life gain's not going to be super relevant. Opponent's going to drown again. Proliferate up to 3, so now Corrupted has been enabled. They might be able to draw 2 cards for 1 mana. Yep. But we get to resolve Tortoise. And go for probably another Argoth. So now Titania threatens to meld. Drown number 3 here. And another Curiosity. So at least they won't be able to counter Titania. And a Vine Lasher. Might want Vine Lasher with Offspring in this matchup. Or we can just play a couple threats at once. Don't want to use Altanak because we only have 4 lanes. Otherwise Titania doesn't meld. So, sure. Give them a Vine Lasher. Doesn't look like they have Cut Down in hand. Or maybe they do. Vine Lasher also protects Titania from the Vraska's Fall. Whisper just to proliferate. That's acceptable. But we are at 5 poison, so we don't have much time. And our opponent's got a lot of cards in hand. Inquiry, get a poison draw to. Do they have an answer left for Titania? Or do we finally get to meld? A Serum Snare to bounce it. Alright. Up to 7 poison, so next turn we likely die. For now, I guess it's just Titania plus a land. If they bounce Titania once again or remove it, we might go for Altanak. Inquiry up to 8 poison. So if they have another Whisper for 1 mana, we're probably dead. Anoint the Overlord. Okay, no point in using my own removal here. So it looks like Titania gets to transform, so I'm not going to use Altanak. Meld using Argoth. Get some more triggers from Vine Lasher, so we might be doing it here. Can still activate Restless Cottage. So that's good enough for me. Opponent cannot cast any spells. So it took us a few attempts, but finally Titania melds at 8 poison, so it was incredibly close. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, and we do have Titania plus Argoth already. A decent curve. So I'll try it. Probably okay to play Vine Lasher on turn 1 with this hand. Opponent on a red aggro. And a forest can maybe save us a damage in the future. So turn 2 we can Anoint. Turn 3 play Titania. And then we gotta start putting lands in the graveyard to gain life. So we can potentially anoint their hasty 3-drop if they have it. If not, we can wait and see if they try and pump the Challenger. Opponent goes for Swiftspear. No 3rd land, it seems. So if I block Swiftspear and they pump it, that's good for us, but they don't really have an incentive to pump the Swiftspear we're blocking, necessarily. So I think it's just go to blocks and then see if they want to enable Prowess. If not, it's reasonable to just anoint the Challenger, even though it's possible they still have their 3-drop in hand that they weren't able to cast this turn. Because if they can prevent us from gaining a life with Titania, it's going to be a lot less impressive. So it does look like they did have a 1 mana instance, but they're still not going for it. So we take 2, and a Hard Claw is next. Alright, backup Titania could also be useful. And then say its name is a way to start filling the graveyard. And eventually we could activate Argoth as well. Opponent could still take out Titania if they have their 5 damage instant that gets a discount. Don't really want to block. If we block Hard Claw, I guess we force them to pump in a way, or they could just Monstrous Rage there. I don't really care too much about the damage from Vine Lasher, so if it keeps us alive a little bit longer, that's okay. Sure. But blocking with Titania is just asking to have it removed, even though again we have a backup. Our opponent did have the Witchstalker Frenzy as it turns out, so Titania down. Do they also have a Monstrous Rage? They do, ouch. So that was the worst case scenario. Now we still have a backup Titania, but we're down to 6. And we can't immediately gain life with a fetch land. So we'll see what happens. If they tap out for Screaming Nemesis, that's actually not terrible, because we can at least block the other creatures. It's going to be a Challenger instead, so they still have a mana up. Yeah, that's what we needed to avoid. So I'll block Hard Claw. And then we're dead to any way to trigger Prowess. So I guess I block Challenger in that case. If they have another Monstrous Rage, we're dead anyway. Sure. We're at 1, we're still alive, and we drew a cut down. Alright, so it's still maybe possible. Start with a say its name. Gets back Vine Lasher. Or a backup Titania. Has to be Vine Lasher since we need additional blockers. Can play it. And then I probably need to cut down the Hard Claw before it gets a chance to attack. Okay. And then next turn I can activate Argoth, which will likely gain 2 more life. Now Screaming Nemesis would be bad for us, because we're at 3 life. So then I would have to jump with Vine Lasher, and we can no longer gain life for the rest of the game. And we have to block both. Don't really have a choice. And they have a Burst Lightning to finish off Titania. At least we take out the Swiss Spear with us. And a Manifold Mouse. Yeah, that Fabled Passage would have been very useful earlier in the game to gain a little bit of extra life. Now we just activate Argoth and hope for the best. Double say its name in the graveyard. So on the board we're not quite dead, but we're dead to any relevant spell. Hardfire Hero doesn't kill us right now, but likely does so next turn. Alright, opponent couldn't attack. And Vine Lasher the draw. So I could play it with Offspring and then Fabled Passage. I think I'm better off just activating Argoth again. I might mill another Say Its Name and then we can get our 9/9. And if not, I'll just go Vine Lasher into Fabled Passage. Alright, so we're still hoping to find a way to recur Titania, so I'm not gonna fetch with Fabled Passage. Not worth the 1 damage when it maybe represents 2 life. So we're going for Double Strike or Trample. Double Strike so we can still jump. Don't want to actually destroy it, because then we die to the remaining damage. So this seems okay. Yeah, if they realize they should go for Trample, we might be in trouble. So, don't have much going on. Play my land and pass. And then now, a 4-power Trampler. I can put a 2-2 in front. And then we don't die, but yeah, Lightning Strike will do it. Yep. If the red deck can stay on 3 lands the entire game, then it has a pretty decent chance of eventually drawing whatever they need. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have a promising start with Llanowar Elves into Nissa, into Tortoise. And then a Virtue could be a decent answer to a Heartfire hero. So we'll see. Challenger for now. I actually don't hate trading and then just casting Virtue, as opposed to trying to ramp out Nissa. Just try and contain the opponent's threats. The only reason to maybe hold Virtue is if our opponent has Screaming Nemesis, then we could take that out before they can deal damage to it. So maybe turn to Nissa still worth it, even though it might die to a Lightning Strike. Alright, especially now with the backup Nissa, this makes more sense. So we don't mind seeing a Screaming Nemesis right now. And there it is, alright. So we're just taking 3. Alright, so if I were to play Tortoise, I need to mill a land in order to still Virtue, but we're pretty likely to do that. So let's see. Alright, perfect. Fabled Passage. Make a black. Find another Alpha Elemental, and it's Titania. And goodbye, Nemesis. Alright, so that was a huge turn for us. And then whether Nissa lives or dies, we still have a Fabled Passage. Opponent knows about Titania, which can gain us life, and that's good enough. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have Elves into Titania, Passage to go with it. Could use a bit more action afterwards. Like a Turtle or an Overlord would be good. Nissa to go with the Fabled Passage. So we do have a lot of good top decks. Even one of our lands with an activated ability. So we're likely to find something useful. For now, another Fabled Passage. Play Titania. Opponent still green-white and a Beanstalk, so it's a Domain deck. Alright, so not the best hands to have against Domain, but Nissa was a great top deck. So even though Fabled Passage is tapped, I'll still fetch to enable Nissa to find an extra Elf or Elemental. We'll gain 2 as well. And I'll play the Elves. Okay, so we're definitely going to be vulnerable to a ramp into Sunfall, but can't really ask for a better start. Still hoping to find more goodies next turn. Opponent had a tap land, so we don't need to worry about a ramp card into Sunfall just yet, but they might have a 2-mana answer like Get Lost. Nissa probably the more important of our 2 creatures, and an Overlord, perfect. So yeah, probably want to still play Fabled Passage before I attack. In case they're planning to remove Nissa. Find another Elf. And then, yeah, I might just hardcast Overlord now, even though there's a fail rate, since we don't have any creatures in graveyard yet. Alright, so we don't get anything back, sadly. So that's where maybe attacking first could have worked out. And it's going to be a Rebuke. Needed to target a tapped creature, so that explains why they waited. Alright, so next turn Overlord can still maybe get Nissa back. Opponent is down to 12 in the meantime, so we'll see what they can come up with. Sadly, no Argoth to Meld Titania, otherwise we could present lethal. Ooh, base out, that's a good one. Nice way to stabilize and set up a Sunfall next turn. So, yeah. Cut down a fish, attack. Don't even have great attacks outside of Overlord. So I might want to attack first, and then if they just double block, we can save the Overlord still. But now we're at the stage of the game where if our opponent has Sunfall, the game's basically over. Opponent's just jumping with one fish. What does that say about the opponent's hands? It's kind of hard to tell at this point, but yeah, Sunfall is still very much a possibility. So, not gonna commit Nissa. Gonna wait for a fetch land or wait to trigger it twice. Authority, okay. Not quite what I was expecting. And another Overlord drawing a card. Opponent making some flying tokens as well. So we can still maybe attack with Overlord. Hope to get a Tortoise back. A Vine Lasher will first gain the opponent some life. But yeah, we'll start with the attack. Found another Titania at least. Opponent once again trumps. Yeah, I don't know if I want to play Nissa. I could go for Vine Lasher into a land. Although opponent already has kind of reasons to wipe the board here. So I don't know if I want to add more stuff to it right now. So I'm just going to be patient, keep land in hand as well. Talents, that's acceptable. Talent level up, so now we can cut down the token they target. Alright, and another Vine Lasher the draw. So, Overlord attacks, and then we have quite a few options depending on what we mill. Another Vine Lasher. Opponent still jumping. Alright, so feels like I probably have to commit something else now. At least one Vine Lasher with Offspring into a land. Could also play Nissa, but yeah, that's just asking for trouble. Could play a second Vine Lasher. I mean, it's possible our opponent's being patient on the Sunfall, but they may just not have it. And I feel like I need to try and make something happen. So we get to deal damage equal to the amount of life the opponent gained right now. And cross our fingers that they don't Sunfall. Alright, opponent makes a token to draw off Caretaker's Talents, so they can't Sunfall me anymore. And Rebuke on the Overlord still pretty good here. Alright, so fetch land of the top, Argoth, Turtle, those are the types of cards we want, and there's Argoth. Alright, so what's our plan? If Titania transforms, we're in excellent shape with quadruple Vine Lasher, so I don't think I need to do much more. So it might just be Argoth, and that's it. Can make a token with it. Might mill another, say its name. Alright, so pass a turn. Don't think we're attacking. If I attack all out except Titania, yeah, that's maybe still okay. Lose a Vine Lasher, get in 4/6. And then cross our fingers that Titania lives. Although we do have a backup with 11 lands in graveyard, plus another backup Vine Lasher. So we do have the potential to maybe try again. Alright, Overlords to draw. So they're still maybe hoping to set up a sweeper. Untap land, and is it time for Sunfall? If Beza attacks, we know what time it is. Nope, just the Caretaker's Talent. Alright, so opponent levels up, copies their token, so they could still answer Titania. If not, they seem pretty dead here, with 3 Vine Lashers in play. And we even have double Fabled Passage for next turn, but probably not gonna need them. Alright, so it was a very strange game where we were playing scared of Sunfall, but yeah, after attacking with Overlord multiple times, it seemed like they didn't have it. Never had a great window to go for Nissa, since I wanted to get immediate value from it, but turns out Vine Lashers are good enough. Alright, so we got to meld Titania more than once, and it usually won us the game on the spot, the turn we did meld Titania and Argoth, so mission accomplished. Now that doesn't mean that I would necessarily recommend this deck for the ranked ladder, since it's still a little bit slow to set up, but of course the addition of Lenor Elves was a huge improvement. So overall a fun mid-range strategy if you want to try something different from the typical demon decks, which are probably still the more consistent of the two. But yeah, getting to trigger Landfall a bunch with Meld is also quite fun. So that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.